In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about a very interesting situation that is currently taking place in the area of the Special Military Operations Zone, because despite Russian massive missile and drone attacks, despite different articles that were published by Western media, by Ukrainian sources, by different sources from the Russian Federation, basically we don't see any progress on the ground. Yes, there are some changes, of course, but they are too small in comparison even with May and or April of 2025. Currently, the Russians are attacking just in several directions. The Russians are trying to improve their positions in the South Donetsk or the Dnipropetrovsk area. The Russians are going to take this territory into complete control, and they will get the border of Donetsk region exactly from this side. Furthermore, the Russians continue their offensive operation to the east of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. So in the settlements around the settlements of Novoekonomichna, Novotoretsk, and this is very important direction. The Russians are not going to stop this offensive. But at the same time, probably for the previous 2 or 3 weeks, we haven't received anything from the area to the south of the Kliban-Byksky pocket. And when talking just about this configuration, it seems that the Russians should have cut this pocket long time ago, but for some reason we don't have anything from this area, and it's strange. Obviously, it's very strange. Furthermore, the city of Chasiv Yar, almost every single day I told you that this is most likely the last week of the city of Chasiv Yar, but another week passes and we see no changes on the ground. Sometimes we are forced to change the map back in Ukrainian favor. The Sivas direction, the same situation. We got several reports that the Russians sometimes enter the city of Sivas, but sometimes we have situation that there are still Ukrainian positions. The Russians stopped completely their Liman offensive operation, just small changes on the ground. For example, the village of Zelina Dolina was caught in cauldron by the Russians probably months ago, but now we still haven't received anything that can confirm that this small village of probably 20 buildings was taken by the Russians completely. We have nothing about this. We have several reports from neutral mappers about the situation in the central Kupiansk direction, that Ukrainian scouts attacked and managed to restore some positions, but once again without proofs, everything without proofs. Yes, there is some new updates and something new in the special military operation, especially about the summer military campaign. Of course, we are talking about the northeastern part of the Kharkiv Oblast. Even Syrsky was forced to pay attention to this direction because something was brewing in this area. But telling the truth, as for the beginning of the 6th of July of 2025, I'm not sure that the Russians are going to continue this offensive, because obviously the Ukrainians had enough of time to redeploy additional forces in this area. They had almost a week since the beginning of the Russian offensive and to stabilize the situation. Once again, I'm not sure that the Russians are going to move further. And of course, the Sumy direction, the Russians started their offensive. They managed to take under complete control lots of villages, and everybody was talking about the city of Sumy as the next city of Ukraine that would be taken by the Russians, and this could happen during this summer. But suddenly, unexpectedly, the Russians stopped. The Russians stopped almost after they finished the battle for the first defense layer. But telling the truth, they haven't finished the battle for the first defense layer. Especially we're talking about the settlement of Yunakiivka, a key settlement in this area. They stopped and we see no progress on the ground. Furthermore, the Ukrainians carry out several counterattacks and they managed to restore control over some lost positions in this area. Today, by the way, just one exception, of course, as usually, we have one change, small change on the ground in the east to the southeast of the village of Yunakiivka. The Russians managed to secure completely the territory of the Russian Federation in the vicinity of the settlement of Garnal, and the Russians managed to take under control several tree belts on the Ukrainian side of the border. So, for example, this is the situation by the end of the 5th of July of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 6th of July. Several pro-Ukrainian sources published an article in the X social network where we could see some explanation and description of what happened there, and according to Ukrainian sources and some centers, that's 237th Territorial Defense Battalion and 129th Territorial Defense Brigade targets Russian positions with the Vampire drone dropped TM-62 near Sadki Sumu Oblast. So this attack was geolocated exactly in this point. So based on this article, we have no geolocation, but according to this article, there was a video because they took screenshot from this video. We have adjusted the map in the Russian favor, and that's it. So obviously we see that the Russians slowed down completely in comparison even with May of 2025. But on the other hand, the Russians increased the number of missile and drone strikes over the entire territory of Ukraine, and the Russians are more successful with this. For example, the previous night was an exception. I would like to remind you that, for example, yesterday we got a lot of articles, lots of statements, maps about Russian attacks in the direction of the airfield by the name of Stara Konstantinov, and today we got additional map, and this time the Russians shown, the sources shown just this map where we can see at least three Iskanders, not three Iskanders, but three daggers or Kinjal missiles attacked the airfield of Stara Konstantinov. Most likely the Russians were trying to destroy F-16 fighters or maybe some Su-24 aircrafts of the armored forces of Ukraine. Furthermore, during the previous night, the Russians attacked the city of Nikolaev. This morning, more precisely, they attacked. This is a fresh scene. We have Russian Giran drone flying above the city of Nikolaev, and then we have several explosions and the consequences of attack. This attack took place this morning, not during the even night, but this morning on the 6th of July of 2025. And several pro-Russian resources and pro-Ukrainian resources confirmed that during the previous night there was another wave of attack. For example, this is the city of Kharkiv, this is the city of Kharkiv as well. So several drones attacked the city in the eastern part of Ukraine. This is, for example, different towns and villages of Ukraine during the previous night. We're not saying that the Russians use hundreds of drones. We still haven't received a map about this or the report of the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, but obviously something big also happened. From the other side, the Ukrainians attacked the city of Novorossiysk. We got reports that during the night the Russians were planning to
Jeg elsker seriøst at game. Hvor ville jeg bare ønske, at man kunne komme sådan helt ind i Construct. Hvad sker der?
Vi skal ind i Super Happy og nedkæmpe det indenfra. Er I klar?
Super nice! Super happy!
Super happy, yeah.
deploys several missile carriers to the Black Sea with the purpose most likely to attack Ukraine with caliber missiles, but then the Ukrainians launched their own attack with Navy drones in the direction of the city of military port city of Novorossiysk, and most likely this attack carried out by the Ukrainians forced the Russians to change their plans regarding missile attack deep inside of the territory of Ukraine, and the Russians were forced to, let's say, move back their fleets in the direction of Novorossiysk. The Russians reported that they managed to destroy the Navy drones of Ukraine in the Black Sea. So what I'm trying to tell you that something is brewing, and more precisely, we start receiving updates, or we stopped receiving updates about changes on the ground somewhere around two important events. The first one, of course, is the conversation between the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, which, and this conversation, according to Trump, was very bad. He was dissatisfied with this call and unhappy with Putin. Later, by the way, we got another report about a call between Ukraine and Trump, and this time Zelensky stated that the conversation with Trump was probably the best of all time. Obviously, this is something like a media attack, but at the same time, I believe that he is saying the truth, at least partially. And this is not the only reason, most likely, why the Russians were forced to slow down their offensive. Currently, we have a very huge escalation in Caucasus, and Caucasus is a probably vital region for the Russian Federation. As for now, we have a real probably problems between Russian and the state of Azerbaijan, former Soviet state, and currently we see that the situation between these countries remains tense. For example, we have several articles that Vladimir Zelensky and Aliyev had calls, conversations. We see that Azerbaijan support Ukraine. We see that Ukraine supports Azerbaijan. We can see that Azerbaijanians captured and lots of Russian civilians in the city of Baku. Some developers, some journalists were captured. The Russians from their side, according to pro-Russian resources, captured lots of criminals on the territory of the Russian Federation. So we see that the situation is very difficult, and we see that it seems that somebody is trying to create the situation when the Russians and the Azerbaijanians are the enemies. So somebody wants everybody to see this situation exactly like this. Best because Azerbaijan is an ally of, or at least former ally of, the Russian Federation, and now it seems that they're the worst enemies in the world. Furthermore, yesterday was a very interesting summit on the territory of Azerbaijan, and the most important thing is that the president of Iran, Pezeshkian, arrived to the Baku, where he had meeting with the president of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, and the most important that they also had a meeting on the territory of the city by the name of Susha. This is a special meeting, obviously. Here we can see the city of Susha. Here we can see the president of Iran and Azerbaijan. The city of Susha is the city of a former Karabakh republic, unrecognized republic of Nagorno-Karabakh that was recaptured by the Azerbaijanians during the previous few years. And what is the most important thing, and what were they talking about, the president of Iran and Azerbaijan? Obviously, the president of Iran is very weak after the war with Israel, and the focal point for the Azerbaijan is this small part. So Azerbaijanians probably since 1991 were wanted and were planning to do everything they can with the purpose to seek an opportunity, to seek a chance to establish complete control over this small corridor that currently belongs to Armenia. So why is that? The Azerbaijan has two parts of Azerbaijan, the eastern part and the western part. So this is the eastern Azerbaijan, the state, very small state, not big one, and this small island between Armenia, Iran and Turkey is the second part of Azerbaijan, something like an island of resistance there, and this part doesn't have any connections on the ground with the eastern Azerbaijan. So there is no way to move through this area. Of course, you need to cross the border with Armenia or Iran to get access to the mainland. And this is the main reason why the Azerbaijanians don't have possibilities to get oil and gas, to sell gas and oil without any problems to the territory of Turkey. Because if, for example, Azerbaijanians were controlling this small area, they could have possibilities to build a pipeline to sell gas and oil to Turkey using this possible road. But to do this, first of all, they need to control this territory. And now we see the escalation, and the Russians is not the only side who is interested in this area as a part of Armenia. Iran is also interested in this small pocket as a part of Armenia, because this allows to control Azerbaijan both for the Russians and for the Iranians. But now Iran is weak as never. And now we see that the Russians are deep in the conflict in Ukraine, and now we see that the Western countries most likely will try to escalate the situation in this region. Furthermore, and now this is the most important part, the main intelligence directorate, the Ukrainian intelligence service, reported that the Russian armed forces are reinforcing their contingent in Armenia to pressure the countries on the South Caucasus, specifically they mentioned a base in Gyumri. So the Russians currently are trying to reinforce their presence in the northwestern part of Armenia. And obviously the main reason of this reinforcement is to stop any escalation, stop anything that can lead to direct war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And for this, of course, corridor. So maybe this is the reason of all escalation between Russia and Azerbaijan. Maybe Azerbaijan and Turkey understand that now or never, that Iran is weak as never, that Russia is deeply inside of Ukraine, and we see no peace ceasefire, we see no agreements between Russia and Ukraine. So they believe maybe that it's time to begin something. But the most biggest problem for Turkey, Azerbaijan, is that Armenia is an ally of Russia. I'm talking about military alliance, and if Azerbaijan begins something, then the Russians will be forced to react. They will be forced to begin a direct war with Azerbaijan. So maybe this is the reason of so small number of updates on the Ukrainian line of combat contact in Ukrainian war. Anyway, let's wait and see. But one thing I can tell you for sure, that the Russians, it will be very difficult for the Russians to fight for two front lines, because obviously if Russians will start fighting with Azerbaijan, despite the fact that war is going to take place on the territory of Armenia, Russians will never see support from the Armenians. Now let's discuss the situation. Let's back to Ukraine, because despite a small number of updates, we have some changes.
Jeg har fundet den. Medarbejdermagneten. Les je ne sais quoi.
And first, let's talk about the most active directions, and we are going to talk about the South Donetsk area, where the Russians managed to improve their positions. As we discussed minutes ago, the Russians continue their offensive in this area, despite the fact that almost every single front line remains without any changes. So the Russians, during the previous 24 hours, according to pro-Russian resources, indeed managed to answer the southeastern part of the village of Voskresenska and to dig in deeper. So the battle for the settlement has begun, but as you can see, as for the beginning of the 6th of July, without confirmation from neutral and pro-Ukrainian sources. Furthermore, pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians managed to secure this huge forest belt along the river of Mokry Yali and to almost answer the northern and the northeastern part of the village of Mirne. There are very heavy clashes for this territory right now, and most likely today the Russians will make first attempts to improve their positions and to answer the village of Mirne itself. As for the settlements of Podubne and Tolstoy, we have important changes, and the most important that, for example, the village of Tolstoy was colored in Russian favor based on the report that was published by pro-Ukrainian deep state. This is very important because this report makes the situation here more reliable. Now we have confirmations from pro-Russian resources, from neutral mappers and pro-Ukrainian resources that the Russians about to finish the battle for the settlement of Podubne and about to finish or to begin the battle for the settlement of Tolstoy. Now we see that first of all, the Russians are trying to create a foothold along N15 road, and we are talking about the villages of Podubne and Tolstoy, and the Russians are trying to avoid direct clashes with the Ukrainians in the settlement of Mirne. So we believe that the Russians are just trying to encircle Ukrainians and to force them to give up their positions without clashes and to move further in the western direction. So also we expect that the battle for this small village of Grushevka is going to start also this coming hour. So when talking about this area, this is the most active area of Russian offensive and where we can see the biggest changes on the ground. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation to the east of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. This is a second area where the Russians continue their offensive operation, but the problem is that despite the fact that the Russians continue their offensive, the Ukrainians are not wasting their time for free, and the Ukrainians continue improving their road supply lines with these protection nets. So this is the picture that we can see around the Pokrovsk agglomeration, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk. The Ukrainians are doing everything they can with the purpose to build as much as possible these corridors with protection nets, which will allow them to reduce effect of Russian FPV drone operators and fiber optic drones. So, and telling the truth, we are receiving less and less updates of Ukrainian Russian attacks with drones from this side. But at the same time, and probably this is also a reason, the Russians are using more and more Gerain type of drones, because most likely these nets can't protect vehicles positions from Gerain drones. They can't protect them from FPV drones, but they can protect Ukrainian positions from Gerain drones. And we have small changes according to notes Ukrainian mappers. The Russians secured these strongholds to the southwest of the village of Popov Yar. As for the city of Konstantinovka, as we discussed, Russians for some reason stopped any attempts to move further in the Kliban-Byksky pockets. Either the Ukrainians stabilized the situation or there are still very heavy clashes, and the Ukrainians and both the Ukrainians and the Russians are sending more and more troops in this direction with the purpose to fight each other, but no changes. We have updates from the village of Bilogora and Alexandra Shultina, and in this video we can see Russians were attacking Ukrainians tanks and vehicles with FPV drones. We see that Ukrainians most likely were trying to counterattack or to bring additional reinforcements in this area, but the Russians sent FPV drones and destroyed at least 2 tanks, 1 vehicle and 1 quadricycle. So this is huge losses for the armored forces of Ukraine in this direction. So maybe we are going to see some changes in this area in coming days or even hours. As for the city of Chasiv Yar, nothing. As for the city of Seversk, despite the fact that yesterday, according to several resources, the Russians answered the eastern part of the city of Seversk, as for the morning of the 6th of July of 2025, we haven't received anything that can confirm this. We haven't received neither any confirmation, additional confirmation, nor some changes on the ground of any of the mapper. As for the Kupiansk direction, there are very heavy clashes for this pocket along the river of Oskol. We're talking about Russian positions, and neutral mappers reported that Ukrainians managed to carry out several counterattacks that allowed them to restore positions and control over some tree lines and strongholds in the vicinity of Kolesnivka. The Ukrainians most likely are going to cut this pocket completely, and most likely we're going to see huge clashes, many clashes in this area during upcoming 2 or 3 weeks. As for the northeastern Kharkiv Oblast, the Russians, according to Russian resources, continue their offensive operation. Now the Russians are trying to clear the way to attack the village of Khatny and Ambarne. The Ukrainian sources are saying that there are hundreds of drones that are flying above this territory and attack Ukrainian positions in this area. Furthermore, the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians are trying to attack in the direction of Odradna and Balogovka from the northwest and from the southeast. They are trying to unite these 2 footholds on the Ukrainian side of the border and on the Ukrainian side of the river Oskol. But as you can see, as for the beginning of the 6th of July, we have nothing to change the map in this direction. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds you we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.